Hello, everyone. This is Mark Plaster, Senior Executive Editor of Emergency Physicians Monthly, and you're listening to EP Talk, the place where emergency physicians come to talk about things that are important, and we try to get real. And with my guest today is Jeannette Wolfe. I've known Jeannette for a long time since we basically started the magazine a few decades back. And she's always kept me real when it came to dealing with women's issues. She's always trying to recruit me to the left side, and so it's always great to talk to Jeannette.
You know, Mark, it's so great to be here. This is going to be so much fun. You and I have shared so many conversations over the years that many of them I'm actually pretty glad have not been recorded, but I'm really looking forward to sharing some of the things that you and I both feel pretty passionate about to a broader audience. So glad to be here.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of background that people don't know about you or I. Well, they basically know me. I've kind of invited people into my life and heart over the years with Night Shift. But tell me, try to spend, this is long format. So tell me a little bit about Jeannette Wolfe, how you got into medicine and what your career's been. You told me that you've been in the same place for a long time, but how'd you get there?
You know, it's a great story. I was thinking about this today, and I want to hear your story afterwards because I don't think I actually know it. And what is our medicine origin story? It's like a Marvel prequel. And as somebody who's been in academics my whole career, I've had the pleasure to sit down with young doctors and hear how they got into medicine. And I'll tell you, a lot of them are like Hallmark movie, like dramatic, emotional stories. They're immigrants and they had some influential physician, or they had somebody they loved who was really sick, and they had a doctor who had great bedside manner.
That
And
sounds
mine
like one of those. That sounds like one of those. The thing you write for college? You know what I'm talking about. Your essay,
you're letting me try to get into college
your
essay.
college essay. See, that I never had to write that. I played basketball in college, for crying out loud. A coach met me in a locker room, and so I
Yeah.
never applied. I never even applied to college. I didn't take the SAT. I didn't apply to college.
Wow. Perhaps my origin story is somewhat different because I did not play center for a college. In fact, though I was a basketball player in high school, and
I know
you know,
that. See.
that was incredibly influential to me because it taught me how to win and how to lose and how to be competitive. So I think
Right.
sports is great for all kids in high school, and I think it may be even more beneficial for women because it teaches them how to directly compete. So my medicine origin story, though, is not some
So you're saying
hallmark.
that women don't know how to compete very well?
Wow, you're just coming right into the ring with some boxing gloves on here. Wow, I see my career fastly ending. So many things, and hopefully we will have so many conversations about this. But as we may or may not understand fully, how women and men compete is probably pretty differently, and
Yeah.
we'll get into that in a minute. So
Yeah.
going back to your original question, Mr. Tangent Man, my original question is I went into medicine not in some Hallmark movie drama, but more like a Wayne's World Saturday Night Live skit, in that I'm a senior in high school. My boyfriend's outside waiting to take me out on a date, and my parents say, "You are not going out until you fill out this stuff for your college classes next fall." And
And
I'm
the
looking
first option was doctor. I'm going to check off doctor.
well, it actually was not quite unlike that. I'm going through that. You're 17 years old. I grew up in this really tiny town. Very few kids actually went to four-year colleges. My parents had the expectation that their kids were going through college, and they always had a pretty high bar for educational expectations of my brothers and sisters. However, you know, I was 17, and my boyfriend was out in the front yard waiting to take me to probably some Friday the 13th horror movie. So I'm looking at this class schedule and I see pre-med. I'm like, oh, pre-med, that kind of sounds cool. So I literally just checked it off. I get the college classes for my freshman year, and something immediately happened. And I don't know about your parents, but the second they saw that I had checked off pre-med, I now became their daughter, the pre-med student.
Right.
So immediately that like sets this huge threshold that if you are not going to be the daughter, the pre-med student, you better be the daughter who has another appropriate, impressionable career attached to her. So I realized that if I wasn't going to be pre-med, I better decide I should be something equally as important in my parents' mind, because neither of my parents are doctors. So then I go to Notre Dame, and that will be, I'm sure, the content for many other podcasts. And by the way, you still owe me several six packs of beer for all the times that Notre Dame has kicked Navy's butt. Just saying, I like
Just saying.
microbrews.
Yeah.
So I go to Notre Dame, and Notre Dame is a pre-med factory. So 1,000 kids start off as pre-med majors, and by the end of your sophomore year, it's whittled down to about 200. So there is
Right.
this huge weed out process. And
Yeah.
what I found very quickly was like, I have no idea if I actually want to be a physician or not, but I didn't want the priest at Notre Dame to tell me that I could not be one. So
Yep.
I studied my butt off more than I have ever in my entire life, my sophomore year of college, just to not be one of those 800 kids that got weeded out of their pre-med program.
You
And
can
at the
imagine.
end,
You can imagine what they thought when the 6'5" power forward came walking onto campus to play basketball and said, "Hey, I'm going to be a doctor." They looked at me and go, "No, you're not.
yeah, you know,
No,
I'm
you're
sure,
not."
I'm sure. So at the end of that story, at the end of sophomore year, I'm still standing, and it was like this circular argument, like, okay, I'm still standing. Maybe I have an aptitude with science. Maybe I'm in a position that this is a viable career. And then I applied to med school. And I was one of those brats that went right from college into med school, where my second highest paying job was Red Lobster waitress. So I
Yep.
sort of jumped a couple of tax brackets. And for people who are coming through now, I think there's such great value of having a job for a couple years before you go to medical college or medical school, because you have such a greater appreciation at a very young age, just the privilege of doing what we do. There's a lot
Yeah.
of really hard jobs out there, and a lot of them don't pay very much, and a lot of them involve, at the end of the day, material that's not really super valued to the community, super valuable to the community that you live in. So
Yeah.
being a physician at its fundamental bedside interaction with the patient. I've been doing this for more than 2 decades, and it is a privilege, and I'm humbled by the ability to hear people's stories at sometimes the most critical junctions of their life.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. You're.
that's my origin story. I want to hear yours. Why did you
Yeah.
become a doctor?
You're talking about your boyfriend. I actually started volunteering at a children's neurological center for the express purpose
Oh
of
my
being.
God, I see a
No,
Hallmark
no, no,
movie
no, no, no,
coming
no, no.
already.
Listen. For the express purpose of being close to one of the girls that was a cheerleader on the at my high school. I had no interest whatsoever in children with neurological problems, and I just happened to get out there, and I don't know. I was touched. I was touched by the kids with autism and CP and seizure disorders and a variety of other things. I was really touched by what was going on there. And she quit, and I continued. And at the end of the summer that I volunteered out there, I told them all that I was, going to college to play basketball. And they said, "What are you going to do?" And it was just about like that. It was just about as impulsive to say, "Hmm, I could be a coach, or I could be a doctor." and, and you got to understand, I hadn't even taken chemistry in high school. I hadn't even taken physics in high school. I had taken one biology course in high school. Even though I had done extremely well academically, I was a jock with a capital J. I was a capital J jerk too, and so my world was completely putting a ball through a hoop. And when I showed up at college and for preseason and all that, and he said, "By the way, are you planning to study at anything?" I said, "Yeah, actually, I'm going to be a doctor." And they looked at me like, "You won't make it. You won't make it." And being a competitor, I said, "Yes, I will. I actually will. You don't know." But and I fought my way through it and didn't get into medical school the first time because I was a knucklehead, didn't fill out the application properly. that's the reason why these essays are so important, that are hilarious to me, because the back of the medical school application says, tell us the story about anything unusual about you. Well, I honestly didn't think there was anything unusual about me, and so I left it blank. And so I
Yes.
sent in my
As somebody who
application.
reads a lot of those now, that's like the put it in the drawer sort of comment, like, really? Really?
Yeah, yeah. And wasn't it? So I enrolled in graduate school, and did a year of graduate school, and then reapplied at the same place that I was as a graduate student, and they took me, and the rest is history. And I was interested in emergency medicine from the first day, because I had a short attention span. I was kind of a adrenaline junkie, and it was an easy decision for me. You got to remember, though, I'm a decade older than you, and at that time, emergency medicine was not a recognized field. And my specialty, my student advisor, who was a general surgeon at the time, who liked me, I think, sent a note around to all the other advisors and said, please discourage this student from pursuing a worthless career in emergency medicine, or in trying to be an ER doctor. Basically anybody can be an ER doctor. So don't waste help him not to waste his time. He wanted me to go into a general surgery residency. And I said, no, I think I know what I'm doing. Like, I've always been arrogant enough to think I knew what I was doing. And so that's how I ended up here. And the long story of my life would take way too long. I want to hear. Let's talk about how you ended up in the academic field, though. I mean, how did that happen?
That's a great question, because even though you're a little bit older than me, I did my residency in the first class at Stanford, and Stanford is sort of the poster child of a West Coast ivory tower place. And yet emergency medicine was a difficult fit when certainly I started out there, because it was the same sort of mentality. Most of the people, probably at the time, half the people were doing our specialty were not actually trained in emergency medicine.
Right.
So you're a member of a specialty that, quite frankly, has a speckled reputation, because the training level of the people who are in it is quite varied. And because at the time, people could volunteer from lots of different specialties to go take a
That's
shift
right.
in the emergency department.
Right.
And I don't know, like, Mark, doesn't that scare you? Like, I think about doing emergency medicine for a really long time. The greatest advantage is just understanding all the new ways patients can sneak in with really dangerous things that you had no clue when you were a younger physician, because you've seen so many versions of really bad. And
A little story to illustrate that. A few years ago, I was up in Nantucket. I took a sailboat up there. It was pretty sweet. And I was up there for several weeks, and I happened to meet this guy in the grocery store and strike up a conversation, as I'm good at doing, and found out that he was a cardiologist who had come there for a week, and he was going to have a working vacation. And while he was there, he was going to cover the emergency department. He was a board certified, I think maybe an interventional cardiologist from Boston. And he was going to have a vacation where he worked in the emergency department at Cottage Hospital, Nantucket. Okay, does that sound bucolic or what? Okay. So anyway, I'm out on my boat, and I'm hearing the helicopter go in and go out, go in and go out, go in and go out. And I happened to see that guy about a week later when he was getting ready to go home. And I said, how was your weekend as an ER doc? And he said, I will never do this again. Never. I said, he was telling me about all the cases. He said, I'm a cardiologist. If they had heart disease, I was in great shape. I didn't see heart disease. I saw everything but heart disease. I saw with people with subdurals and people with penetrating injuries, and he was visibly shaken. And he said, I would never do that again, particularly in a hospital like Nantucket that doesn't have the tertiary care backup. He's got to fly everybody out. And
you're right.
I kind of puffed my cheek out and said, I do that every day, no problem.
It's interesting because I actually know several physicians who are emergency medicine trained who work in Nantucket in sort
Uh,
of that similar deal. And by the way, it's a sweet package if you're an emergency medicine physician because they do a really nice job setting you up with housing and
right.
transportation and getting your car over the ferry. But there's two things you need to know that's very unique to Nantucket. One, as you mentioned, it's an island. So one of my friends who's worked there has says you are never so aware of the weather as an emergency medicine physician as you are when you are in an island with a critically ill patient that
Yeah.
there is
Okay.
no backup.
If they can't fly, they can't fly. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. You've got them.
And number two is that the people who are on that island, for the most part, except for the people who live there year round, expect an incredible high level of care
That's right.
and do not perhaps think about the limitations of being on an island during an emergency, such as some very well to do people with some very complicated medical problems. Like if you are a liver transplant patient, maybe not choosing to vacation on Nantucket
Yeah.
is probably a good idea. So I
Unless you
think
have your
that
own private jet at your beck and call that as a all weather and everything else to get in and out because it's the real world. And the interesting thing about Nantucket, it's no different than Augusta, Kansas, or any other town like that out in the, in I was in Nebraska and Illinois and places that you're the only person there, and it may be snow, you may be upper Minnesota, and you've got an ER someplace else. Nantucket sounds very exotic and it's close to Boston and such. But what if you're an ER doc in the middle of Kansas or Nebraska or Utah or Idaho, and you're the only person there? You have to be able to hold it down.
yeah,
It's an,
and
it's
I
an
think
amazing
you
career
really
we
forget. Yeah, I think you really forget about the span of our different emergency departments. I think you and I have talked about the choreography of an emergency department that for in general, whether you work in a busy place or a place that doesn't see the same volume, there's still sort of this buzz and chaos that if you're a patient and you're not used to that world, it seems very disjointed. But if you're a physician, you sort of get the rhythm of it pretty quickly.
have.
So there's this underlying sort of choreography and base to the symphony of emergency medicine. But what I see at a tertiary care hospital where I have a tremendous amount of backup versus what somebody sees in Alaska. Like I was at a wedding one time and one of the women at the wedding, her husband wasn't there because he was a plastic surgeon who did tonsillectomies and he worked in a remote area of Alaska. And he said he will not travel until all of his tonsillectomy patients are 2 weeks out because he
Right.
realizes there's nobody else there to take care of a tonsillar bleed if it happens.
Right.
So
If they bleed, they
we
die.
yeah, so we don't appreciate that we adapt quickly to the unique circumstances of the communities that we live in.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. I've got 15 minutes to talk to you, and I'm going to open up the big can of worms here. We're going to talk about women, being a woman in emergency medicine. No, actually, that's part of why I've always enjoyed your perspective. But I want to find out as you came into academics, what role did being a woman, a female, play in your desire to do that, your success at doing that? Tell me about that. Reflect a little bit on that, your career as a female emergency physician.
Well, so first of all, obviously you know that I have some definite opinions about some of the different challenges that all of us face in emergency medicine, and some are a little bit more relevant to certain subgroups of individuals. I think we need to start that emergency medicine as a job is a pretty unusual bird. We see, every day when we go to work, doesn't it amaze you that the people we see at the end of our shifts, sometimes they're not even sick at the beginning of our shifts. Like they haven't they haven't got their esophageal obstruction from the lunch they haven't eaten yet. They haven't drank their last beer at last call and rammed their car into the telephone pole that you're going to see at 11:30. it's always sort of struck me that unpredictability of what we do. And one of the things that attracted me to emergency medicine is I very much like the idea that you're all in, and then you get to leave the hospital, and if somebody has, you know, a complaint or a nurse doesn't show up and your charge nurse has to be called in, that's somebody else's job. Like, it wasn't my job to
Yep.
staff an office. It wasn't my job to take care of a patient after my shift. I like the idea of sort of having a clean, when I'm working, and when I'm not working, it's somebody else's job to do that.
I think
Now,
that's actually something that most emergency physicians are attracted to is the no matter how intense and obviously we all know that it can be incredibly intense or even no matter how boring or whatever it is at the end you can do it because at the end of that 12 hours you may be shaking or you may be crying or you may be angry, but you walk out to the parking lot and you sit down in your car and it's done. It's
yeah.
done for at least another 12 hours or so. And so you walk away. And that was always incredibly attractive to me.
Yeah, and I think what I say to myself, and I certainly say to some of our younger doctors, is that it doesn't matter if you leave exhausted. Like, if you leave just like, oh my God, I can't even, two neurons are no longer synapsing anymore. I don't even know where my car is. If you leave that way, it's okay.
Yeah.
You need to worry about burnout is if you drive into the parking lot before your shift and you're feeling that way. And that's sort of always my gut check, like, when's my next day off? Like, you have to be able to fill up your tank, because what we give to our patients takes such an emotional toll that if we don't do that self-care and you're driving into your next shift and there's this, either inner voice or a butterfly in your stomach of low level dread or low level exhaustion before you even pull up into the parking lot, that's a sign that it's time for a little bit of reflection. Are you doing the right job at the right hours, at the right place, at the right pace? Because when you're young, it's so easy just to pack in shifts. And you get so intoxicated by the amount of money people will pay you to do extra shifts. But that's not really a
Yeah.
long-term
That's not a good
strategy to
plan.
stay
No,
in
that's
this
not
field,
a
at least in
plan.
my mind. And if
Yeah.
people are going to pay you a lot more to work in a certain hospital, you always have to ask yourself, well, why is that? So
Sure.
why is that?
Well,
So I like that.
let's get back to talking about how about women. Let's talk
And
about women
academic.
here.
So I went into academics because I really, I enjoyed teaching. I enjoyed going deep in different topics and going back to longevity of careers. And I don't think I realized this when I went into it, but I think it's important, on past middle part of the career, looking in the rear view mirror, that we have something about medicine that we feel passionate enough about that we want to learn a little bit more about. Because walking into room 5 for 20 years and seeing somebody with COPD for the 500th time, that can get a little bit old. There has to be something that interests you in the material. And I think that's important whether you're in academics or not in academics. And for me, I like the idea of sort of this more deep dive into different areas of medicine. And I started out doing traditional research. And then you and I have talked about this story. I had this moment of truth. I was looking to do some National Institutes of Health grant applications, which would have really set me up for a long-term research career. And I was flying into San Francisco, and it was one of those moments, like we all have these moments in life where have tremendous impact to us for that very specific moment. And they're usually in pretty dramatic scenarios. And this was one of those near-death experiences where the plane got out of control. We dramatically dropped 10,000 feet. Everybody's beginning to pray. And I had just this moment of clarity, like, Jeannette, if you do everything right to get this K grant, everything right, you are going to be spending the rest of your life in front of a computer writing grants to support not just yourself, but your research team around you. And is that what you really want to do? And I realized at that moment that that's just not what my passion was going to be. And there was a void. And then a few weeks later, I went to that ASAP meeting, and realistically, and at that point, totally just walking through the Bruce. I'm going to start that. So I had this gap, and I knew there was an opportunity to try to figure out what I was going to do. How was I going to contribute to medicine? And I was at this ACEP meeting. We were at the educational forum section in the middle where they have all the drug reps and the people with the ET tubes and the ultrasounds. And literally I walked past your booth and I had read some of your articles from Night Shift, and I just went up to you and started talking to you. And I said, look, I really enjoy what you do. I would love to write some of the things that you write from a female perspective. And on the spot, you said, just send me something. And that simple invitation out of the blue, totally cold called, that simple invitation to offer to do something different. I followed up, I wrote a piece for you, and I attribute you to this great opportunity to have a voice and to improve my writing over many years, and to fall into this passion of educating people about important issues via different angles, using writing, using podcasting, using lecturing. And I don't do hardcore research anymore, but I feel that my role is a translator of information to different audiences, information that should be told that maybe we just haven't discovered yet. Was that really not so good?
Yeah, no. I'm sitting here going, geez, I just thought you presented yourself extremely well, and I thought, sure, right. I'm sure you can do as well as I do. So what the heck, you know?
I can tell you. Do you remember what the first piece I wrote for you was?
I have no clue.
The first piece I wrote for me was "Don't Call Me Dear." It was
Oh,
like,
is that right?
no, I think it was
I didn't remember.
called me Dr. Dear.
Dr. Dear, that's right.
Dr.
Oh my
Dear.
gosh.
And it was based on a conversation I had. And I can tell you, geez, how long we must have known each other, because I was pregnant with my first kid, and now he's 20. So
wow.
It was an article in response to a surgeon who had called me dear 3 times on the phone because I wanted to do a digital block on a child who had an amputated finger. I had given them opiate pain medication for their amputated finger, and I was trying to arrange follow-up. And he had lectured me ad nausea about whether or not I had the skill to do a digital block as an emergency medicine doctor and as a female emergency medicine doctor, and how outrageous I was to want to give a 10-year-old 2 milligrams of morphine for their amputated finger. So I remember that, and the conversation was, you only call a doctor dear if they are your wife or maybe your daughter.
That's right. Well, that's actually a good way to wrap this particular session up. For everyone listening, we're going to come back with another podcast very shortly. We're going to wind this one up, and I hope you've enjoyed your time with EP Talk, and keep listening to us. And if you've got things you want to say, this is where emergency physicians come to talk about things that are real. I think you've heard that from Jeannette and myself, hopefully. Thanks for joining us here at EP Talk. I hope that you'll come back and listen to some of the other podcasts that we do from time to time, and keep listening. Thank you.